The rain fell softly against the streets of Woodburn, Oregon, on the evening of March 14, 2003, creating shimmering halos around the streetlights that lined the main thoroughfare through town. It was the kind of gentle spring rain that the valley's farmers welcomed, the kind that promised an early bloom for the region's famous tulip fields. But for those moving through the night, the mist felt more like a shroud, blurring the edges of a world that was about to change forever. Inside the Dar Mart convenience store on Highway 214, 34-year-old Jennifer Haley Garcia wiped down the counter for the third time that hour. She glanced at the clock above the coffee station. 10:47 p.m. Just 13 minutes until her shift ended. She tucked a stray strand of dark brown hair behind her ear and offered a tired but genuine smile to an elderly man purchasing a lottery ticket. As she handed him his change, her wedding ring caught the harsh fluorescent light, a small, bright spark of the life that waited for her just a few miles away. Outside, the rain continued its quiet percussion on the metal roof, and the neon open sign cast a pulsing red glow across the wet pavement of the car park. Jennifer had no way of knowing that in less than an hour, she would vanish completely, leaving behind 3 children, a bewildered husband, and a mystery that would haunt the Pacific Northwest for 2 decades. Jennifer Maria Haley was born on August 3, 1968, in Salem, Oregon. She was the youngest of 4 children in a close-knit Catholic family, a girl whose childhood was defined by the steady, working-class rhythm of East Salem. Her father was a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart of gold. Her mother worked in a school cafeteria, ensuring no child ever went hungry. Friends from Jefferson Middle School remembered Jennifer as perpetually cheerful, the girl who was always organizing bake sales or volunteering to tutor younger students in maths. She graduated from South Salem High School in 1986, where she'd been a standout member of the Future Business Leaders of America. Back then, her dreams were filled with the scent of yeast and sugar. She wanted to open her own bakery someday. But those dreams shifted, as dreams often do, when she met Roberto Garcia at a 4th of July barbecue in 1988. Roberto was a soft-spoken dairy farm worker, originally from Michoacán, Mexico. He swept Jennifer off her feet not with grand gestures, but with his gentle manner and an unwavering dedication to the concept of family. They were married on September 15, 1990. In a small, flower-filled ceremony at St. Luke Catholic Church in Woodburn. By the spring of 2003, Jennifer and Roberto had built a modest but profoundly happy life. They lived in a small, well-maintained rental house on 2nd Street, a pale yellow 2-bedroom cottage with a carefully tended garden where Jennifer grew tomatoes and marigolds. Their 3 children were the sun, moon, and stars of Jennifer's universe. There was Michael, age 11, Sophia, age 8, and little Daniel, who was just 4 years old. Jennifer was the kind of mother who lived in the details. She coached Sophia's youth soccer team on the weekends, her voice cheering the loudest from the sidelines. She never missed Michael's clarinet recitals, and every afternoon, she could be seen in the pickup line at Valor Middle School, with little Daniel strapped into his car seat in their 1998 Toyota Corolla, waiting for his older siblings with a snack and a story. To help make ends meet, Jennifer worked the evening shift at Dar Mart 3 nights a week. She was always careful to be home in time to pack school lunches and see the kids off the next morning. On her kitchen counter sat a worn recipe box, filled with index cards covered in her neat, looping handwriting, her grandmother's tamale recipe, Roberto's favorite carne asada, and the chocolate chip cookies she baked for every school fundraiser. At the Dar Mart, her company workers described her as unfailingly reliable. She arrived 15 minutes early for every shift and kept a small notebook in her apron pocket, where she jotted down birthday reminders for regular customers. She was a woman woven into the fabric of her community, a thread that no one expected to be snapped. At 10:58 p.m. on that fateful Friday, Jennifer rang up her last customer of the evening. It was a mundane transaction, a pack of Marlboro Lights and a Pepsi. The customer, a long-haul trucker named Dale Thornton, who was just passing through on Interstate 5, would later tell police he noticed nothing unusual. To him, she was just a pleasant woman behind a counter, eager to get home. Security footage from that final hour shows Jennifer moving efficiently through her closing duties. She restocks the cigarette displays, wipes down the coffee station, and counts the drawer with practiced ease. At 11:02 p.m. she clocks out. The recording captures her pulling on her dark blue jacket, a hand-me-down from her sister, with a small tear in the left pocket she'd been meaning to mend. "See you Sunday," she calls out to Terry Campos, the overnight clerk arriving to relieve her. Her voice is clear, carrying the light fatigue of a long day and the quiet anticipation of the weekend. She pushes through the glass door and steps into the rain-soaked night. The camera catches the white of her Nike trainers splashing through a shallow puddle as she walks toward the employee parking area behind the building. At 11:04 p.m., her headlights sweep across the rear lot as she backs out her silver Corolla. The red glow of her taillights fades into the mist as she turns onto the highway. It was a 5-minute drive home, just 1.7 miles. But when Roberto woke at 6:15 a.m. the following morning to prepare for his early shift at the dairy, the house felt wrong. The air was too still. He reached out across the bed, but Jennifer wasn't there. Her side of the sheets was still made, the handmade quilt his mother had given them for their anniversary undisturbed. He walked into the bathroom. Her toothbrush sat dry in the holder. He went into the kitchen. The coffee maker, which she always programmed the night before so he would have a hot cup waiting, sat dark and silent. A cold flutter of unease stirred in Roberto's chest. He walked through the small house, checking each room. The children were still deep in sleep, their breathing rhythmic and innocent. Jennifer's purse wasn't on its usual hook by the door. Maybe she went to the store for milk, he told himself, though the logic felt thin and fragile in the early morning light. He called her mobile phone, a basic Nokia flip phone she'd received for Christmas. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Jennifer. Leave me a message and I'll call you right back." The cheerful, recorded greeting sent a physical chill down his spine. He called the Dar Mart. Terry Campos answered, his voice groggy. "Yeah, Jennifer left right at 11 like always. I saw her get in her car." Roberto then called Jennifer's sister Maria. She hadn't heard from her since their phone conversation the previous afternoon about Sophia's upcoming birthday party. By 7:30 a.m., Roberto was standing in the lobby of the Woodburn Police Department on Front Street. His hands were shaking so violently he had to lace his fingers together as he tried to explain to Officer Kevin Matsuda that his wife, a woman who never missed a morning, who lived for her children, had simply not come home. Within 2 hours, the Woodburn police launched a missing persons investigation. Sergeant Rick Westering, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for meticulousness, took the lead. He immediately dispatched officers to the Dar Mart to secure the security footage. The tapes confirmed Terry's account. Jennifer had left at 11:04 p.m. She was alone. No one was following her on foot, no one was waiting in the shadows of the lot. Her vehicle, a silver 1998 Toyota Corolla with Oregon plates JMG 483, was entered into the national databases. A bolo "Be on the lookout" went out to every law enforcement agency in the Pacific Northwest. By noon, the community had begun to react. Volunteers from St. Luke's Parish, organized a makeshift command center in the fellowship hall. Jennifer's mother, Patricia, stood at the center of the room, her face a mask of controlled terror, as she handed out the first batch of flyers. The photo on the flyer was one taken only 2 months earlier at Michael's winter concert. Jennifer's smile was bright, her eyes sparkling with maternal pride. Underneath, the text read, "Missing Jennifer Haley Garcia. Last seen March 14, 2003, 11:00 p.m. It noted her height, 5'3", her dark brown hair, and the small scar above her right eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. On the second day, the Marion County Sheriff's Office joined the search, bringing in K-9 units and aerial support. Search teams combed every inch of the road between the Dar Mart and Jennifer's home. It was a short stretch of road, but it was bordered by agricultural land and dense patches of woods. Bloodhounds picked up Jennifer's scent in the employee car park. But the trail vanished at the edge of the pavement, confirming she had indeed entered a vehicle. Helicopters circled a 20-mile radius, pilots scanning the gray-green landscape for any sign of a silver sedan. Divers were sent into the Pudding River and Silver Creek, their lights cutting through the murky, cold water. Detective Sarah Chen from the Major Crimes Unit began interviewing everyone in Jennifer's life. What she found was a portrait of a woman with no secrets. There were no marital problems, no hidden debts, no signs of depression. Jennifer was a woman who had bought streamers, balloons, and a unicorn-shaped piñata for her daughter's birthday just days before. That piñata still sat in the hall closet, a hollow, colorful paper shell, waiting for a celebration that was now slipping away. The media descended on Woodburn by the third day. News vans from Portland lined the streets, and Jennifer's face appeared on every television screen in the state. On March 18th, Roberto appeared at a press conference. He stood behind a forest of microphones, his voice breaking as he read a prepared statement in halting English. "Please," he said, tears streaming down his face. "My children, they ask every day, when is Mama coming home? I don't have an answer for them. If someone has Jennifer, please let her come home." Standing beside him was 11-year-old Michael, trying to be the man of the house, his lip quivering. Little Daniel was in his grandmother's arms, calling out loudly, "Where's Mommy?" while Sophia sobbed into her aunt's shoulder. It was a scene of raw, unshielded grief that broke the heart of the state. Tips began to flood the hotline. A woman in Salem thought she saw Jennifer at a grocery store. A man in Eugene claimed he saw the Corolla at a petrol station. Each lead was followed with desperate intensity, and each one evaporated into nothing. On March 20th, a glimmer of hope appeared when a fisherman reported a submerged vehicle in the Willamette River. Dive teams spent 8 grueling hours in the freezing current, only to recover a 1996 Toyota Camry that had been stolen months prior. It wasn't Jennifer. Detective Chen looked closer at the geography of the disappearance. The section of Highway 214 Jennifer traveled was poorly lit, with almost no traffic after 11:00 p.m. In 2003, there were no traffic cameras, no smart doorbells, and few businesses with exterior surveillance. It was a blind stretch of place where a car could be forced off the road, or a driver intercepted with terrifying ease. The police looked into registered sex offenders in the area. All had alibis. They looked into recent parolees. None fit. They even considered Roberto, but he passed multiple polygraph examinations, and his alibi was ironclad. He had been home with the children. A fact confirmed by neighbors, who saw the lights in the house throughout the evening. As the days turned to weeks, the initial frenzy of the search began to settle into a heavy, suffocating silence. The posters on the telephone poles began to fade under the Oregon rain. The breaking news segments were replaced by other tragedies. But in the yellow house on 2nd Street, time didn't move forward. It circled the drain of Jennifer's absence. Roberto couldn't bring himself to move her things. Her clothes still carried the faint scent of her perfume. Her recipe box remained on the counter, a silent testament to the meals she would never cook again. Michael, Sophia, and Daniel were growing up with a ghost as a primary influence in their lives. They were the children of the woman who vanished. And as the months turned into years, the mystery of what happened in those 1.7 miles became a permanent fixture of the Woodburn landscape, a dark story told in whispers, waiting for a truth that seemed as though it might never arrive. The heavy silence that followed Jennifer's disappearance didn't just settle over the house on 2nd Street. It seemed to sink into the very soil of Woodburn. As the days bled into weeks, the 1.7-mile stretch of Highway 214 between the Dar Mart and the Garcia home became a corridor of ghosts. Detective Sarah Chen spent her nights tracing that route, driving it at 11:04 p.m., the exact minute Jennifer's Corolla had pulled out of the car park. She noted the flickering streetlights, the long gaps of pitch-black agricultural land, and the way the mist from the Pudding River would often crawl across the asphalt, blinding even the most careful driver. It was a blind stretch of vacuum of witnesses. In 2003, before the ubiquity of smartphones and dashboard cameras, a person could be swallowed by the night in a matter of seconds. The investigation, initially fueled by the adrenaline of a rescue mission, began to groan under the weight of its own futility. Every lead felt like a lifeline that snapped the moment the police reached for it. There was the yellow van citing a witness claimed to have seen a battered Ford Econoline swerving near the highway that night. The police spent 4 days tracking down every yellow van in Marion County, only to find a local painter with a faulty alternator and an ironclad alibi. Then came the psychics. They called from as far away as Florida and Maine, their voices hushed and dramatic, claiming to see dark water and tall pines. In Oregon, a state defined by dark water and tall pines, such descriptions were a cruel taunt. One psychic was so specific about a location near Silver Creek Falls that the sheriff's office authorized a full-scale dive team. They found nothing but an old logging chain and the rusted frame of a bicycle. In the Garcia household, the atmosphere was one of suspended animation. Roberto refused to accept the word missing as a permanent state. He kept the porch light on every single night, a beacon for a woman who wasn't coming home. He continued to work his shifts at the dairy, his body moving through the motions of milking and hauling, but his mind was always on the telephone. Every time it rang, his heart would skip a beat, a momentary surge of hope followed by the crushing disappointment of a telemarketer or a sympathetic neighbor. The children, Michael, Sophia, and Daniel, were the collateral damage of this uncertainty. At ages 11, 8, and 4, they were old enough to understand that their mother was gone, but too young to grasp the finality of it. Sophia would often sit by the front window with her school bag, waiting for the silver Corolla to turn the corner. Michael, trying to emulate his father's stoicism, took over the task of making school lunches, though he could never get the crusts cut quite the way Jennifer did. "She's just lost," Michael would whisper to his sister at night. "She'll find her way back. She's too smart to stay lost." But the statistics were against them. As the 6-month mark passed, Jennifer's case was featured on America's Most Wanted. For a brief window, the national spotlight returned to Woodburn. Tips poured in from across the country: sightings in truck stops in Nevada, sightings in diners in Texas. Each one was investigated with the same grim determination, and each one led to a different woman who happened to share Jennifer's dark hair and weary smile. Detective Chen's file on Jennifer grew until it required its own shelf in the evidence room. She interviewed the trucker, Dale Thornton, again and again. She looked into the tweakers and drifters who frequented the Dar Mart. She even looked into a group of seasonal workers who had left the area 2 days after the disappearance. The silver Corolla, a vehicle so common it should have been easy to spot, had seemingly vanished into another dimension. By the 1-year anniversary, the media had moved on. The breaking news banners were gone, replaced by the mundane headlines of local politics and sports. A small vigil was held at St. Luke's. The community gathered, clutching candles that flickered against the damp Oregon wind, but the crowd was smaller than before. People wanted to support the family, but they also wanted to look away. A disappearance like Jennifer's was a reminder of how fragile a safe life truly was. As the years began to stack up 510, the missing posters on the Dar Mart's windows became sun-bleached and curled at the edges. Eventually, they were taken down. The case was officially classified as cold. The lead was handed from Detective Chen to Sergeant Westering, and eventually to a series of younger detectives, who looked at the thick binders with a mixture of reverence and dread. To them, Jennifer Garcia wasn't a mother who coached soccer. She was a set of coordinates and a list of dead-end interviews. The family's agony shifted from an acute, stabbing pain to a dull, grinding ache. Roberto eventually had to make the impossible decision to move on, not from Jennifer, but from the limbo. He finally boxed up her clothes, but he couldn't bring himself to get rid of them. They stayed in the attic, the scent of her laundry detergent fading year by year. Michael graduated from high school without his mother in the front row. He became a mechanic, his hands constantly stained with the same grease that had marked his grandfather's. Sophia went to nursing school, driven by a need to fix the things that were broken. And Daniel, little Daniel, who had been 4, grew into a man who had no memory of his mother's voice, only the stories told by his father and the silent, smiling face in the photographs. Every March 14th, the family would return to the Dar Mart car park. They would stand in the spot where the Corolla had been parked and say a prayer. It was a ritual of defiance against the silence. "Someone knows," Roberto would say, his hair now shot through with gray, his face etched with the deep lines of a man who had carried a mountain for a decade. "The land doesn't just eat a person and a car. Someone is holding the truth." He was right, of course. The truth wasn't in the rivers, and it wasn't in the truck stops of Texas. It was much closer than any of them dared to imagine. It was sitting in the dark, less than 10 miles from where they stood, buried under 18 years of blackberry brambles and the patient, uncaring growth of the Oregon wilderness. The trail had gone so cold it was Arctic. The $25,000 reward sat in a frozen bank account, untouched. The case was a ghost, a cautionary tale for the new clerks at the Dar Mart who were told never to walk to their cars alone after dark. For nearly 2 decades, the answer to the mystery of Jennifer Garcia remained locked away, hidden in the shadows of an abandoned homestead that the world had forgotten. The truth was waiting for a single moment of chance, a single misplaced step, to bring it screaming back into the light. And that moment was finally approaching, on an unseasonably warm Thursday in October 2021. The silence of the woods was about to be broken. The transition from a missing persons case to a recovery operation didn't happen in a police station or a laboratory. It happened in the quiet, indifferent heart of the Oregon woods. On October 7, 2021, the air was unseasonably warm, the kind of day that draws people outdoors for one last breath of summer before the autumn rains take hold. A group of teenagers, led by 17-year-old Tyler Morrison, were cutting through a dense, wooded area off Crosby Road in rural Marion County. They were looking for a shortcut to a fishing hole on Silver Creek, navigating through what locals called the Crosby property, 40 acres of mixed forest, and an abandoned homestead that had been tied up in legal disputes for decades. It was a place the town had forgotten, a patch of land where the blackberries grew thick and the trees seemed to lean in, guarding secrets. Tyler was leading the way when his boot caught on something hard and metallic, protruding from a mound of leaf litter and moss. He stumbled, catching himself against a Douglas fir, and looked down, expecting to see a discarded piece of farm equipment. "Hey guys," he called out, his voice sounding thin in the heavy silence of the trees. "Come look at this." What they found was the corner of a rusted bumper. As they brushed away 18 years of organic debris, the unmistakable shape of a vehicle began to emerge, looking like a ghost rising from the earth. The silver paint was almost entirely gone, replaced by a skin of rust and lichen. But when Tyler wiped away the grime from the rear of the car, 3 letters became visible on the corroded license plate JMG. At 10:23 a.m., Tyler dialed 911. By 11:00 a.m., the woods were no longer silent. Marion County Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Johnson was the first on the scene, followed shortly by Detective Brenda Walsh. Walsh, a 16-year veteran of the department, felt a jolt of recognition the moment she saw the car's silhouette. She had studied Jennifer Garcia's cold case file more times than she could count. She knew the plate by heart, JMG 483. "It's her," Walsh whispered, the words hanging heavy in the damp air. The Corolla sat approximately 200 yards from Crosby Road, tucked down an old, overgrown dirt track that had once served as a maintenance road for the homestead. In 2003, this track would have been visible. But 2 decades of blackberry brambles, young alders, and thick undergrowth had swallowed it whole. The car hadn't crashed, it had been driven here, parked, and left for nature to reclaim. CSI technicians spent the next several hours meticulously documenting the site. Every twig moved, and every leaf brushed aside was recorded. A heavy-duty tow truck was brought in to extract the vehicle from its forest grave. The Corolla creaked and groaned as it was winched onto the flatbed, metal panels separating from the rusted frame like peeling skin. Once the car was secured at the evidence garage, the true gravity of the discovery set in. The interior was a haunting time capsule from March 14, 2003. In the cup holder sat a brittle Darmart coffee cup. On the passenger seat lay Jennifer's purse, a black pleather bag, its surface ravaged by moisture, but its contents preserved. Inside, detectives found her wallet, her driver's license, $43 in deteriorated bills, and plastic-sleeved photos of her children Michael, Sophia, and Daniel, whose faces were still vibrant despite the darkness. But the most chilling discovery came under the forensic lights. Specialists detected smears and droplets of blood on the driver's side headrest and door panel. The steering wheel, despite the environmental degradation, yielded a partial latent fingerprint that didn't belong to Jennifer. In the boot, they found a tire iron wrapped in a rotting flannel shirt. It, too, bore traces of biological material. While the forensic team worked on the car, Detective Walsh ordered a systematic search of the surrounding woods. She knew that if the car was here, Jennifer wouldn't be far. On October 12th, 5 days after the car was found, cadaver dogs alerted in a dense grove of trees about 300 yards from the vehicle. There, beneath 18 inches of forest soil and a layer of rocks and fallen branches, they found her. Jennifer was wrapped in deteriorated plastic sheeting, still wearing the dark blue jacket with the small tear in the pocket. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Catherine Ross noted an immediate, grim detail, a depressed fracture to the left side of the skull, consistent with a blow from a heavy, blunt object. The tire iron found in the boot was no longer just a tool, it was the likely murder weapon. On October 14th, dental records provided the final, heartbreaking confirmation. Jennifer Maria Haley Garcia had finally been found. The news hit the Garcia family with the force of a second disappearance. Roberto, now 59, sat in Detective Walsh's office and wept not with the frantic energy of the past, but with a weary, hollowed-out finality. "At least we can bring her home now," he whispered. "At least the children can say goodbye." But for Detective Walsh, the discovery was just the beginning. The missing posters were replaced by a homicide file. She began looking into the history of the Crosby property. She found that in 2003, the land was essentially abandoned following the death of its owner. It was a place only locals, or those who worked the land, would know about. She began cross-referencing the partial DNA profile recovered from the steering wheel with the Cody's database. For weeks, the lab worked to clean the degraded samples, a process of digital and chemical surgery. Then, on November 3, 2021, the system pinged. The DNA belonged to Kenneth Ray Dutton. Walsh pulled his file and felt a cold hand wrap around her heart. In 2003, Dutton had lived in a trailer on Wyatt Lane, in Woodburn, less than 3 miles from the Dar Mart. Even more damning, he had worked for Green Acres Landscaping, a company that had held the maintenance contract for the Crosby property until 1999. He knew the road. He knew the woods. He knew how to make someone disappear. The search for Jennifer Garcia was over, but the hunt for her killer had just begun. Kenneth Dutton was no longer a name in a database. He was a predator who had been hiding in plain sight for 18 years, watching the family's vigils, and perhaps even walking the same streets as the children he had left motherless. The silence was finally over. The woods had confessed, and now, it was time for Kenneth Dutton to do the same. The arrest of Kenneth Ray Dutton did not bring the immediate explosion of closure the town of Woodburn expected. Instead, it began a slow, agonizing process of unearthing a predator who had perfected the art of being invisible. Dutton, 58 years old at the time of his arrest, in late 2021, lived in a small, cluttered apartment in Salem. He had spent the intervening 18 years working a series of menial jobs: landscaping, janitorial work, and short-haul delivery driving. To his neighbors, he was a quiet guy, a man who kept his blinds drawn and his interactions brief. He had no criminal record for violent crimes, only a string of minor traffic violations and a dismissed shoplifting charge from the late 90s. When Detective Walsh and a team of U.S. Marshals brought him in, Dutton didn't fight. He didn't even seem surprised. He sat in the interrogation room, his hands folded on the metal table, and watched the detectives with a flat, clinical detachment that chilled even the most seasoned officers. The evidence, however, was overwhelming. The cleaning of the DNA sample from the Corolla's steering wheel had provided a near-perfect match. Furthermore, the tire iron found in the boot, the weapon that had ended Jennifer's life, bore a minute trace of skin cells on the handle. The lab confirmed the skin belonged to Dutton. For 3 days, Dutton maintained a wall of silence. But as Detective Walsh laid out the evidence, the link to the Crosby property, the DNA, the timeline of his employment, the wall began to crack. On the 4th day, he asked for a cup of water, leaned back, and began to speak in a voice that was devoid of remorse. He hadn't targeted Jennifer specifically. He had been hunting, as he put it, driving the back roads of Marion County on that rainy March night. He had seen her at the Dar Mart while buying a pack of gum, noticed she was closing alone, and waited in the darkness of a neighboring field. When Jennifer pulled out of the lot, he followed her with his lights off. On the darkest stretch of Highway 214, he tapped her rear bumper, a Pete maneuver intended to look like a minor accident. When the terrified Jennifer pulled over to check the damage, he was upon her before she could even reach for her Nokia phone. He told the detectives how he had driven her car, with her body inside, to the one place he knew would be safe: the abandoned Crosby homestead where he had worked years prior. He knew the maintenance track was hidden from the main road. He knew the legal battle over the land meant no one would visit for a long, long time. The rain helped, he told Walsh, a small, dark smile touching his lips. It washed the road clean. The trial of Kenneth Ray Dutton began in June 2023. The courtroom was packed every day with members of the Woodburn community, but the front row was reserved for the Garcias. Roberto, Michael, Sophia, and Daniel sat shoulder to shoulder, a family forged in the fire of a 20-year mystery. The prosecution presented a case that was a masterpiece of modern forensics and old-fashioned police work. They showed the jury the rusted Corolla, the faded missing posters, and the chilling testimony of the teenagers who had stumbled upon the grave. But the most powerful moment came when Sofia Garcia, now 26 and a nurse, took the stand. She didn't look at the cameras or the jury. She looked directly at the man in the orange jumpsuit. "You took my mother's life," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But you didn't take her from us. We remembered her every day. We loved her every day. You are the one who spent 20 years in a prison of your own making, waiting for the world to find out who you really are." On July 14, 2023, almost exactly 20 years and 4 months since Jennifer disappeared, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery. Kenneth Dutton was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The resolution of the case brought a strange, heavy peace to Woodburn. The blind stretch on Highway 214 was finally fitted with modern LED streetlights and a commemorative plaque near the spot where the Corolla was found. For the Garcia family, the end of the legal battle meant they could finally focus on the memory of the woman, rather than the mystery of her absence. Jennifer was buried in a beautiful, sun-drenched plot at St. Luke's Cemetery. Her headstone features a small, engraved bundle of tulips and the words, "A mother's love never fails." Roberto still lives in the yellow house on 2nd Street. He finally moved Jennifer's clothes from the attic, donating them to a local women's shelter, a gesture he felt she would have loved. He still bakes the chocolate chip cookies from her recipe box for his grandchildren, the smell of yeast and sugar filling the kitchen, just as Jennifer once dreamed it would. The case of Jennifer Garcia serves as a testament to the fact that no matter how much time passes, and no matter how deep the woods, or thick the silence, the truth has a way of rising. It reminds us that missing is never a permanent state, as long as there is someone left to remember, and that even the darkest 1.7 miles can eventually be brought into the light.